Hello, my name's Hannes, and welcome to Painting by Letters. Today we're going to continue a project that we've already started, that being the process of fixing my Necrons. I'm really enjoying this as an opportunity to sort of scope out how the channel might feel and improve things going forwards as well. So last time in this project we painted the larger models, the Canoptech wraiths, things like that, and we painted them up in the new scheme. Said new scheme was based upon new paints that we picked out last time, particularly in the GW range relating to the greens. And then, although it was interesting last video, I realised I quite like GW paints. They mixed really nicely with the water and they seem to work really well. I absolutely despise the pots, but yeah, I have to be honest, I did have to eat my hat on that one a little bit. Never mind, we live and we learn. So what do we need to do next? So firstly and most obviously, and this will probably be most of the job, is warriors. We've got 20 of them in the army. I'm not too bothered if the standard is lower for these guys, as really they're just foot soldiers, foot troops. I just want to make sure that they match everything else. I think that matters far more to me than them being of some sort of exceptional standard. Not that, to be fair, I ever aim for an exceptional standard, but just trying to make sure that they match everything else. So thinking about it, the greens will probably make up the shoulder pads, just like we've done with other units, and the blues will probably be the rib cage as well, to keep them together. Next we've got the scarabs. I absolutely love the scarabs. I always have done ever since I got into the hobby years and years and years ago, and I just think they're dead cute. Although the second you actually think about their proportions, they make no sense whatsoever. You'll see me drawing this out, and I think this was really the moment that I realised just how little they make sense, when I had to take a version of their limbs and display them out. How those little feet ever are supposed to work, but they're just adorably cute. I really do quite like them. And then finally the Plasmancer. Really, in this case, I don't think I've ever actually used the Plasmancer. It just doesn't seem that good in game. Maybe they'll change that in 10th edition. And because I got the Indomitus box quite late in 9th edition, it wasn't a game legal army out of the box anymore because it had too many HQs. Got to say though, bit of a suspicious shape I've just drawn there. I noticed that while drawing this out as well. Don't know, someone in GW probably had a little bit of fun. And I had so much fun realising that I absolutely screwed up the proportions of the blades, which is why I'm having to do a little bit extra detail in the dark there. But nevertheless, I do really like those kind of sort of sword thing. I don't know weapons, I'll be honest. I do really like it and I think it's quite cool. Obviously that guy does come with 2 of the crypto thralls. Not really a big fan of them, but they're in the army anyway, so we'll be repainting them. Just as before, I set out my table, and you can see that all of the models are already on the green. So if we just inspect what we've got to start on, so here's our Plasmancer. We've got dark green, not very much of it, and I've got to be honest, I absolutely despise the gold here. I really, really do. It just didn't work for me, and so we'll do something with that. Got the crypto thrall here. He doesn't have any kind of exposed ribs, so I'm thinking about using that dog collar element for the blue. Might have to have a bit of a think about whether that's an edge highlight or a contrast job, given that it's a bit of a flat panel, but we'll loop back to that. Got the little scarabs here. There's a lot of green. It was a really big debate earlier on about where I was going to make the blue. I think it's going to be their like little sort of claw feet things that might look quite good in a blue, just off that kind of dark red base as well. And then here just the basic warrior. So as said before, we're probably going to follow the conventions we did in the last part. Blue rib cage with the changed green shoulders. I had a bit of practice obviously with the GW paints that we were using last time. and I got the consistency much better first time on this. It was much closer to 2 thin coats, where in the last part it had been a couple. So we can see here me going over the Plasmancer on one side, and we've already got, given how dark that base is, actually not that bad a coverage for a watered down paint, and it will only require 2 thin coats, which is nice. But we can see that because of the way that those sort of, I don't know, cryo tubes or something expand out of their back, we've got to be quite careful following the lines as well. At this juncture I was also starting to think about ways that we could use the other greens as well. Some of these panels are ever so slightly larger, and particularly in the last part I talked about the fact that some of the green blending just didn't quite work in the way that I wanted it to. So as I was slowly going over this, I was also considering raised elements, things like that we could come back to. And then the little scarabs. Honestly, these guys were pretty nightmarish to coat in the green. However, I do remember that the last time I went over them, I mean that must be what, 6 or so months ago, when I painted them the first time with that dark green, they were nightmarish then as well. There's a lot of small little elements to cover, a lot of things to make sure that you're going over without the paint going elsewhere. I suppose the nice thing is normally you've just got sort of 3 of these bases in a box, whereas in this case we had 6, which made it a bit more of an arduous task to go over. To begin with, as you can sort of see here, I was picking sort of one out and repainting that one and then moving to the next one. Later on I got much quicker by just doing sort of all of the left hand sides at the same time, flipping the base round and then doing all of the right hand sides as well, as I slowly paint these out. If you are going to do anything with scarabs, just take it really slowly for these pieces. They're dead small and they're going to have to match the rest of your army as well. So on larger panels, when you can do more interesting things more easily, just remember that if you are going to have something like scarabs in, you probably will need to make sure that you can still dial that back on something smaller. I keep thinking about how these guys must move as well. Something reminds me of, well, because they're scarab beetles, I'm reminded quite a lot of the scenes from, you know, the Mummy trilogy. Was it a trilogy? Was there more movies than that? Who even remembers? I'll look it up for this. Will I? I don't even know. But, you know, when you had the absolute hordes of them sort of coming through the tunnels and things like that, it just really reminds me of that. Particularly as you get about 7 of them on a base. The problem with that obviously is for us as painters, as it doesn't mean that there's 6 or 7 of them to do each time, but I guess that's the price of doing business. They just do look quite cute though. Still don't really like the gold. I'm not going to fix that in this video. Probably between videos I might think about going back over those golds and fixing them, but I just think they're sort of dead cute, and I can easily see how as a horde of them they'd be intimidating. One of the things that I was thinking about doing is a bit of a jokey Necron army, although probably nightmarish to paint would be just to have as many scarabs as I possibly could have. I've got to pay for that and then I've got to paint it, so it'll probably never happen. I have enough projects, but I do quite like these guys. And then finally we just get to the warrior. It's a simple coat. Dead easy to do, just tracing the lines, not going beyond them, and just making sure that it is totally covered. So we go through our 2 coats, and then finally we want to sort of blend in our lighter colours. This takes a bit more work than it did the last time. I think a lot of the problem was the paints were just slightly too thick. The darker green, I feel like I really understand how that one works. But this lighter green I'm just struggling with a little bit, but you can see me sort of slowly going through these now that they've got their sort of 2 coats on. The scarabs, however, are an absolute joy in this regard because they're quite small. You don't need to put too much paint on, it's just giving an effect. So even if the paint stands out as obviously painted on, it does give that effect quite nicely, whereas some of the larger models in particular, you will find that you've got to be a little bit careful. Might also be worth talking about these bases while we're here as well, because you can see them close up. This is one of the Citadel ones. I'd actually painted the base red before coating it in the paint, but you can see where it sort of flecks up that some of that detail was lost. So there's probably a job in there some point at some juncture to fix that. For the warrior units, I feel like I finally nailed how this should work, just sort of giving the effect of a little bit of lightness as well. I just did one coat of this, it's just to sort of give an impression before moving on to the edge highlights. I've talked in the past about being someone who doesn't always have the steadiest hands. It gets particularly bad with me if I ever have a migraine, and when I started this process I did not, so I sort of thought, right, my hands are vaguely steady, as long as I hold them together I'll just work my way through it. So you can kind of see here that I'm beginning, but as this process continues I did start to develop quite a severe headache, and you can see here just a little bit of shake is starting to come in my hands. That process gets worse, particularly some of the off-camera bits were not ideal, so we'll probably seek to redo that as well. What I'm doing here, even though my hands aren't brilliantly stable, they're not too bad at this juncture, is I'm really pressing on the, I guess the painting hand that is really being pressed into the support hand, and that's a good way I've found to sort of mitigate some of the shakiness. But in these scarabs in particular, there's a few where the edge highlighting has gone over that sort of little orb thing they've got in the middle. That's going to be absolutely nightmarish to clean, but I will have to do that at some juncture. And you can see here, this is an example of me messing up. So usually I just put water on, try and lift the paint off, but I didn't notice this quite early enough. So what I did here is I blended it into that middle green a little bit, just to sort of reduce how obvious that mistake is without having to redo the whole armor panel. These steps where I'm fixing things like that I would rarely bother showing because it's not too interesting, but after every single shoot I've been sat there for at least an hour fixing small little bits here and there that I make a mistake on. Anywho, we've moved on to the blue now, and I've got to be honest, I'm pretty sure this is a mistake. I ummed and ahed about this, about what I was going to do, because I really didn't like the gold on this model. I think for the Royal Warden model it's not too bad, but for this, for the Plasmancer, I mean again, the Plasmancer's never on the table, so I don't know why I care, but I still do. It just didn't, that gold just didn't work, so I thought I'd go over it in the blue, and I'll be really honest with you, I'm not sure I like the final result. But it's all experimentation and practice, and you never know, we might go back over that another time. For the other units this is a bit simpler, so we'll just thin down those blues and go over the metallics. Nice thing with the smaller pieces is it really does just take 2 thin coats. However, for I think this entire army it was 1 to 2 coats for this process, because this Vallejo blue, the light blue colour that they've got, is absolutely brilliant in coverage even when thinned down. Really couldn't recommend Vallejo's light blue high enough. The one problem I will say, particularly with this, is in quite a few of the models I went over that chest piece in unfortunate ways. And so here we've got our crypto thrall, and we're going to paint up this dog collar. I don't know if what we really should call it. I'm calling it a dog collar because it's the only sort of the only article of clothing I can think of that it matches. I don't know, you couldn't really call that a choker, could you? Their collar, at least. I'm painting this over in the light blue. Again, this part takes really quite nicely to the paint, which was nice. It didn't take very much touching up on the second way through either. The scarabs, because it's just their little feet, I actually decided just to go with 1 coat for quite a lot of these and actually allow the paint to be slightly thicker than I would do normally, just to make sure that that coverage was still there. This is mostly because the parts are actually very, very small, and you can see in a few places we have sections where the plastic that they're molded out of does seem to have sort of blended together. I'm not good enough with a knife to cut that out myself, so I left that in. Same as last time, we'll just go through some touch-ups on a second coat as well. As I say, this was mostly touch-ups for a lot of these units, but for the troop ones, this really was a second coat. After this, the process was quite simple. Just taking out that blue contrast colour and just letting it seep into the recesses on the soldier units. That rib cage has enough detail to carry that paint by itself, and just letting it do that job. On the Plasmancer, this did bring the blue alive a little bit, but I wasn't too happy. So one of the things that I have done to this model before doing this is just some very minor edge highlights. Admittedly, I had to do this on a different day before a business trip, so I don't have any video of that. And then for the scarabs, we've just taken that light blue colour, mixing in some white and just using it as a bit of a dot highlight. Contrast will do what it'll do, and it'll seep into all the crevices. And then for the crypto thralls, I got video of this one luckily, just a really quick and dirty edge highlight. And then I did stain this over with the contrast as well. Right, so here we've got it. We've got the entire Indomitus box plus a few additionals painted in the new scheme. We're in a really nice place to start growing this army as well and start tackling my pile of shame. I really like this army now. The more I look at them, however, the more I realise they look less like Trazyn and more like Orokin, so I might have to have a think about that. Really wanted a Trazyn, never know, I might get both. I just don't like the Orokin model somehow, it just doesn't do it for me. But anyway, here we have it. We've got the new army with the blue. I think it works really nicely off those red bases. So we've got like a dark red base, like a punchy blue, and then a nice green accent as well. It does bring everything together. The one thing I think I would think about if I was redoing this army is obviously some of the red blades and things fade a little bit because of the bases. Because I'm using so many colours on the main models, it just allows the base to sort of bleed away some of the visual interest of those reds. So I might do that differently if I lived another life, but I don't think I'll do that for this. Anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. This was Painting by Letters. I'm Hannes, and keep safe out there.